Okay. All right. So we are continuing our study through Daniel, and tonight we're moving into the portion of Daniel that deals with his visions. If you have been studying with us, it's the first half of the book is a historical record, and it's sort of a storybook, and it's where we see the lion's den and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and really the more familiar parts of the book. And then the second half is really the meat and the bones of this. It's probably less well known, but in my mind, probably the most important and most incredible portion of the entire Bible, especially, I mean specifically chapter 7. Chapter 9 is probably the most incredible prophecy in the entire Bible. Thank you. I think most people would agree on that part. And then chapter 8 and 11 deal with a period of time between the testaments that we hear people refer to as the silent years. But they're not silent. They're written in advance in such incredible detail that it is absolutely mind-blowing. And so it's 6 chapters of visions. They're not in chronological order. We kind of start over. We moved chronologically through the first 6 chapters. And now we sort of reset, and each one of these will give a little bit of a timeline, but they're not necessarily, it tells you when he's having this vision, but it's really more of his journal recording the visions. And so it's a new section. It's a new. It doesn't have the same feel and same sound. It's not a storyteller. It's really just a record of things he saw and less fluff. But it is really, if you were impressed by Daniel in the first 6 chapters, you will be absolutely blown away by the last 6. And obviously tonight we're in chapter 7, which is the vision of the 4 beasts. And one of the things we're going to see is this really will mirror what we saw in chapter 2 with Nebuchadnezzar's vision of 4 great empires in the form of Nebuchadnezzar has a dream that Daniel interprets where he sees a statue with a head of gold, a chest of silver, a stomach of bronze, and legs of iron with feet of iron mixed with clay. And it tells us that those are the kingdoms that will succeed Babylon. And really, we get a profile of the world empires in advance. And now we're really going to dig into that concept. I think it's important. You can really ask the question, a lot of what we're going to cover tonight has already been fulfilled. The rest of it will be fulfilled long after we're gone. The first half of it is prophecy that was fulfilled arguably before and around the coming of Christ. And then the last half of this is prophecy that deals with the end times, really the end of the Great Tribulation and the rise of the Antichrist, which by definition means the church is out of the picture. And so you could really easily ask the question, why does a Christian care? Like, why study prophecy? And I think there's 3 main things. We've touched on this, but here I really want to reemphasize that. From God's standpoint, if you were to ask God, why do you care about prophecy? He will tell you, I have written these things in advance that you may know I am God. I have told the end from the beginning that you may know, over and over and over, that you may know that I am God. And what that means is, find me another religious text that even attempts at prophecy. You want to talk about what distinguishes the Bible from all other religious texts? Find me anything else in human history that even attempts to tell in advance things that are going to happen. We hear of people like Nostradamus or Rasputin who make these like vague predictions and then in some semblance come true in some event that has nothing to do with their lives or nothing to even do with the prophecy that they're talking about. And the world goes nuts and every one of you knows their names. But you have a religious text that has hundreds and hundreds of prophecies written hundreds and thousands of years in advance that come true in such specific ways that it can't even possibly be refuted. And people start worrying about, well, who was really king of Babylon at the time of this? You know, that the Bible can't be true because that was clearly not the king of Babylon. It's like, seriously, that's a form of intellectual delusion that I can't even fathom. To have a book that very clearly prophesies, even if it only got 2 things right. you have to start with the specificity that we're talking about here. You have to start talking about, did this come from outside of our time domain? And if you're looking for proof that this is inspired, that this book is from outside of this time domain or inspired by God, you're not going to make that argument on, well, Jesus is the Son of God. Okay, well, how do you know? Well, Jesus died for our sins. Well, what does that mean? Right? You can make that argument on prophecy. And if you were to ask me, if someone were to come to me, and it has yet to happen, and I'm dying for the time that it does, if someone were to come and tell me, how do you know the Bible's inspired? I would say, please turn in your Bible to Daniel chapter 7. And we would walk through this one, and I think if all you had was Daniel chapter 7, you can prove irrefutably that the Bible was written from outside of our time domain because of the specificity of things we're going to go tonight. There are several others that I'd love to take 4.5 hours sitting down with that person but if that's all I got, if I got 15 minutes, this is where I'd turn. The other aspect of it is prophecy builds trust. We see prophecies that are already fulfilled. We see things that happened hundreds of years before our time. They were predicted in advance and they're already completed. The value of that is, if I said this was going to happen and with 100% accuracy it came to pass, then you can believe me when I make outrageous claims like, I will never leave you or forsake you. When I make outrageous statements like, God became a man, took on flesh, and died for our sins. I can't possibly fathom how that transaction works, but I can trust that it's true because some insanely outrageous statements that there could be no other justifiable basis besides inspiration came true. And I think that's kind of the purpose of this, of Christ's story. The man's lowered through the roof, and the first thing Christ says to him is your sins are forgiven, right? And that sets the Pharisees that are on site off. Like, only God forgives sins. And Jesus' response is, which is easier to say? Your sins are forgiven you, or say, rise up and walk? But that you may know that the Son of Man has power on earth to forgive sins. He said to the man who was paralyzed, I say to you, arise, take up your bed, and go to your house. Right? That same concept. So this thing that you can't grasp, this thing that you can't prove is true. I will show you things that you can see and can grasp. You could say, anything you want to that's going to happen when the world's about to explode. No one's going to be around to prove it, right? But if you say these things in advance that are much harder to come to pass, like predicting in advance the mobilization and dominance of entire world empires, then it's much easier to believe something that you can't prove will come to pass and have that faith. And then, of course, our overlying principle, the reason we study prophecy is all of it points to Christ. Every aspect of this points to Christ and validates something about either his first coming, his second coming, his mission here on earth, or his role as our Redeemer. Every aspect of the Bible, and we'll see it through and through. So as we actually get into Daniel, now, like I said, we're outside of this timeline, and I think it's important to keep this in mind, but don't get tied to it. When you're talking about the visions, we're going to kind of jump all over the timeline. And people will make a really big deal of that and say, well, that's where you get this two authors of Daniel, that Daniel didn't write Daniel. It's actually written in two different languages, and there's two different styles of writing. You'll see if you just pay attention to what's going on, it's clearly a narrative that tells his life account. And then the rest of this book it's written like a journal. It's written like, I saw a vision that was in my head while laying on my bed, and he writes down what he saw. And go figure, those are in his native language versus the other ones that are in Aramaic. And so you can, if you're just kind of paying attention to the structure of the book, you can really see why there's two different languages and two different styles of writings. There's two different purposes. So we're outside of the timeline that we've been working through, but each point it'll tell you where we are. And again, I just want to hammer. I'm probably going to do this every week, and you're going to get tired of hearing it and seeing this timeline, but you have to remember how, us looking back, you hear a prophecy of world empires, of the rise and fall of the Grecian Empire and the Roman Empire, and we kind of say, okay, that's cool, but unless you put your mind in the setting of when it was written, you don't fully grasp the importance or how unlikely it is that it could be predicted in advance, right? Daniel is writing here and writes of things that all of chapters 7, 8, 9, 10, and 11 deal with this period that is known as the silent years. So we're multiple hundreds of years in advance of these things occurring. And he's going to write about empires rising that are not even cities at the time that he's writing. They're vassal, like, municipalities within a greater empire. And he's going to write about world powers being overthrown by what's effectively like a neighborhood town. And it's the equivalent of saying, like, I don't know, the state of Washington will be overthrown by Washougal, you know? And you make a prediction like that, and you're like, if you're sitting in this time, it's like, what? What are you even talking about? Those aren't even the same thing. That's not rival nations. We think of the Persian Empire and the Grecian Empire as rivals. In our narrative of history looking back, we think of them as rivals, and well, one just had victory over the other until Rome came along, and it's a rival, and it had victory. Not at all. They were cities. At the time, I mean, when Daniel wrote this, Rome's not even a city, and he's talking about the entire rise of the Roman Empire. Greece was not even, it wasn't even a unified body. It was a fraction of a bunch of fractured states that were not even unified until long after Daniel wrote this. And he's going to talk about in incredible detail Alexander the Great's entire campaign and all the subsequent history, it's history to us, all the subsequent events following that in insane detail. But unless you remember that he's writing before they were even a concept, none of it seems that incredible. And then you throw in when the text was laid down in stone. So the argument that, well, Daniel is laying out these world empires with insane specificity for hundreds of years. It was just, well, clearly it's a forgery and it was written after the fact. And that argument, because of there's so much historical and archaeological evidence for the date of the writing of this book, that argument in 1947 was foolish. After 1954, when they finished excavating the Dead Sea Scrolls, that argument became absolute lunacy. Like the fact that you found a fully completed copy of the book of Daniel in the Dead Sea Scrolls, that they date back to shortly after the fall of Greece or the rise of the fall of the Persian Empire, which was the basis for the Vorlaga. And then those texts were used for the translation of the Septuagint, which happened very shortly after in 285. And so they were clearly, without a doubt, in existence in 285. We have tons of copies of the Septuagint. But now we have fully intact copies of the Vorlaga, which are the texts that were used to translate the Septuagint that date back to even before that. And so you can go and physically see those, and they have dating factors. They were found in clay jars along with other like historical records of things that are happening. I mean, it's clearly the Dead Sea Scrolls was an absolutely Holy Spirit inspired find when you look at the body of things they found. Not only is it fully intact copies of the scriptures, it's like journals from people that are dating, you know, putting the date on it and saying, I write this as of that date. And like translations of texts that we have no other way of translating. And so they were able to nail down the latest possible date that could have been, because people are legitimately writing down the dates on these documents, and that's just not even a done thing. So there is any argument that this happened, that this is a forgery, that this was written after the fact and chronicles things after they'd occurred is without a doubt refuted, and probably has always been, if not certainly now. So that is setting the stage, because if you don't do that, then you don't fully grasp how incredible what we're about to read is. I'm going to break this up into kind of two discussions. There's one discussion of the things that have been fulfilled, and then the focus shifts to things that are yet future. And you can see the narrative shift, but I'm going to really just do it in two distinct pieces. And it has it has the ring of what Christ said, is that you may know these things will come to pass. I say something you can verify. If these things don't happen, then forget all of this stuff about the second coming of Christ. So forget all this stuff about the end times if the first things I say don't come to pass. But when they do, maybe pay attention. It's kind of the message, and a lot of Daniel's prophecies are exactly that way. They'll have some historical account or some historical prophecy, and then he'll just jump ahead. Isaiah does the same thing. Weirdly, they have a very similar style of each prophecy has a past that's already fulfilled in historical record, and then they'll just jump ahead and start talking about something that's very clearly in the end times, return of Christ, and it has a flavor of, if I prove this, then what choice do you have but to believe that? Okay, so just to jump into this, I have some notes here in this one, because we've done this on several occasions. There are one of the, it's a theology and Bible college concept that has almost no practical purpose in the real world, but it's called expositional constancy, but it just comes down to, if you see a term used over and over and over and over in the Bible, especially within the same realm. So if the same term is used in prophecy in several different places, and in one place there's a translation where it says, like, the horn is power, or the horn or the head is a government. In this case, we see each of the heads is a kingdom that will arise. And you start seeing that in the same context throughout the whole Bible. You can kind of set yourself up for a default where you say, unless I see something otherwise in the text, I'm going to assume it means X, right? And there's some of them that are so well established that I don't think you could find a Bible commentator that disagrees that this is meant to be a symbol, especially when you see it used in the prophets and then used consistently in Revelation. You can kind of lock those in. And so we've got a couple of those here that'll end up playing out throughout the entire book of Daniel, and they're important, just kind of like baseline concepts. So chapter 7 starts off, in the first year of King Belshazzar, the king of Babylon. So we set the stage, obviously, before the fall of Babylon, prior to the Persians conquering Babylon. If you remember chapter 5, the handwriting on the wall was in the 5th year of King Belshazzar. So this is towards the end, but still, Daniel is a captive in Babylon and has yet to be taken to the Persian Empire. But in the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon, Daniel had a dream and vision on his head, or of his head upon his bed. Then he wrote the dream and told the sum of the matter. Daniel spake and said, I saw in my vision by night, and behold, the 4 winds of heaven strove upon the great sea. Two concepts here that become constants throughout the whole Bible. First of all, wind is we know without a doubt is synonymous of spirits. That the actual word ruach is the same word for wind and for spirit. And it's used almost interchangeably. That's part of Hebrew, is that word play that we talk about a lot. But I could probably give you 40 different examples of places where wind is used as a form of the Spirit coming upon you. And this other one is the Great Sea is the Mediterranean. That one's easy. The Great Sea is all of biblical history focuses around Israel, and Israel is the Mediterranean, and all the world politics that happen around Israel. The seas plural, or even the sea, can also be synonymous of just the multitude of people, like of humanity. So coming out of the seas could very well mean it comes out of the area of the Mediterranean, which I think very well fits the context. But you could also make the case that it's coming out of the world, of people in general. And we went into both those concepts in pretty good detail when we did our Revelation study. And so I'm trying not to be too overlapping with those. But for our purposes, when you see seas, we're going to assume it means out of the multitudes. Or in this case, it doesn't do damage to do it either way. This one, it says specifically the Great Sea. And you'll see on 5 different occasions in the Bible, that is a very specific reference. The Great Sea is the Mediterranean. And so winds strove upon the Great Sea. It's kind of conveying this idea of the Spirit contesting with mankind, or like something out of the people, and the Spirit of God was moving across the people. And we get this, not important to the narrative, but you'll notice each one of these subsequent world empires, these great beasts that come out, it's going to be very specific to say, and power was given unto him. And power was given by whom? You're getting the sense that the Holy Spirit is poising this whole thing as if it's the chess player, as if the Holy Spirit is a chess player and he's moving upon this area, right? He's doing something with this. And I gave power to them. And then I gave power to them. And then I gave power, because it's very specific to say in each one. It doesn't say that they shall conquer. It'll say power was given unto him to subdue nations. And so I think that's the concept, is conveying that the Holy Spirit, that God is in control of all of this. That the things that are about to come to pass, all of it are the workings of God. And you can see, we're going to talk about the rise of the Babylonian Empire, the Persian Empire, the Grecian Empire, and of the four that it mentions, other than the fourth, the great and terrible beast, the Bible will specifically say in different places, not in Daniel, says of Cyrus that he shall be my instrument, that I shall use him to subdue nations. It says of Nebuchadnezzar, he shall be my right hand, and through him I shall subdue the nations. It says of Persia, of the following Persian Empire, that the Grecian Empire shall bring judgment upon them, and they shall be my strong right hand. And so it's kind of conveying that same concept, that you're going to see the moving of nations and the formulation of world empires, but this is all part of this epic chess game that the Holy Spirit is playing. God is in control of all of it, is sort of the notion that's being conveyed. So 4 great beasts came up from the sea, diverse one from another. Beasts is probably the easiest of all the terms. Beasts will be nations or kingdoms, empires, however you want to say it. You'll notice that in prophecy, the ruler of a nation and the nation itself will be flip-flop. We talked about interchangeably. So Nebuchadnezzar is Babylon, and Babylon is Nebuchadnezzar. And so it'll use terms like, I gave unto him the power, might, and dominion. And then it'll say, he subdued nations. And then it'll say, in the same paragraph, and that great city became. So it'll refer to him as he and it. It'll do the same thing with Cyrus over and over and over, refer to the Persian Empire as he, and it'll refer to the him as it. And so it's near inseparable. And the reason that's so important is because it's going to do the same thing with the Antichrist and the end times. All of this is leading to a prophecy about the end times and the rise of the Antichrist and his reunited Roman Empire that he brings to make war against God. It will over and over throughout each one of the prophets, and we noticed all throughout Revelation, it will refer to Babylon and the Antichrist as very interchangeable. Like it'll say he is this, and then it is that, and Babylon made war against this, and he did not prevail. Right, and so you'll see that that concept, and there's sort of a spiritual aspect of it that's explained in Daniel 10. Daniel 10 gives us a glimpse into the dark side. It's going to talk about the prince of the power of Greece, right, and it's going to talk about the prince of the power of Persia. And the point is, after all of these different prophecies, then we're going to get a glimpse of what's really going on. It's not the city that's evil. It's not even the person that's ruling the city that's evil. It is a battle. It is a spiritual battle that's going on. And that's the purpose of Daniel 10, is you're going to lay this scene of all these big movements and stuff. And then they pull the curtain aside and you see this is the workings of the prince of the power of Greece, and this is the workings of the prince of the power of, and it really brings the spiritual significance of it to the forefront. But that's the reason, from God's perspective, a nation and a man are interchangeable. It's all a spiritual battle. It's him moving them, and it's the prince of the power moving that, and that's what Daniel 10 makes clear. So these great beasts. So we're talking about four great beasts that come up from the sea, so come out of the Mediterranean, and each one's diverse from one another. I think that the way to do this is, and there's probably a better way to explain this, I'm going to just go through this one. I'm going to read through it, and then I'm going to really pick these apart in detail, because there is a very incredible takeaway just to look at it in the big picture and say, holy cow, in 350 BC, or I'm sorry, in 550 BC, Daniel predicts the rise and fall of all four major world empires that would come to pass. And it's like, even that alone, and that's how far we got in Nebuchadnezzar's dream, right? We saw the interpretation of the dream that there would be four empires. We don't get them named, but it says, you, O king, are the head of gold. You will be replaced by another that is weaker. And then subsequently that there will be four world empires. If that were it, that's still incredible. There has only been four major world empires that have dominated civilization. Other than that, there's been powerful countries. There has not been any concept of a world governing power other than the four that are predicted in the Bible. If there were five, we'd have to go and revisit these. There weren't. After the fall, after the Roman Empire was never defeated. It just kind of atrophied and faded into different cities. No one ever conquered Rome. There was moral decay, and it sort of dissipated. It moved to the eastern, from the western leg being dominant to Constantine moving to Constantinople, and then the eastern leg of the Roman Empire being dominant, but Rome was never defeated. And there has never been a world empire since. If I'm missing one, please remind me, but it hasn't happened in my recollection.
Well, they used to say that the sun never sets on the British Empire because they had colonies everywhere.
Yep, they had colonies. They definitely have been. There have been people that have conquered, but there is a vast difference between a united military force that dominates most of the known world and Britain, who went to third world nations to get coffee beans and sugar and took over decimated countries in various areas like Australia, who was barely populated with Aborigines fighting with sticks. You know, like what Britain did, they probably controlled more landmass than anybody, but they didn't conquer anybody. Like go through the list of who they defeated, it's nothing. They couldn't even defeat their neighbors. They were still held at bay by the Gauls and by the Frankians, and so it's, if you're talking about someone who actually just took authority from someone else, it has never happened since. And if it did, again, you just kind of crumple all this up and say, well, find something else. But it hasn't, and it won't. So the four are laid out here. The first was likened to a lion and had eagle's wings. I beheld, the wings thereof were plucked, and it was lifted up from the earth and made to stand upon feet as a man, and a man's heart was given to it. And behold, another beast, a second, like unto a bear, and it raised itself up on one side, and it had three ribs in its mouth, in between its teeth, or in between the teeth of it. And they said thus unto it, Arise, devour much flesh. After this I beheld, and lo, another, like unto a leopard, which had upon the back of it 4 wings of a fowl, and the beast had also 4 heads, and dominion was given to it. And after this I saw in the night visions, and behold, a 4th beast, dreadful and terrible and strong exceedingly. And it had great iron teeth. It devoured and broke in pieces and stamped the residue with its feet, or with the feet of it. And it was diverse from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. Okay, very odd language. I think, I don't even think I've seen, this is one of the very few prophecies that I've never even seen an attempt of someone to say, oh, no, that's not prophetic. That's a reference. Most of the time, someone can come up with some wild theory that's not prophecy. That's describing something that was happening at the time, right? It was not intended to be prophetic. This was a depiction of this battle, that someone will always come along with some scheme good luck finding something historical that meets this that allows you to wash this one away. The specificity, why are we talking about it? He saw a lion with the wings of an eagle, and then all these things happened to it. We saw a bear, but it's not just a bear. It's a bear that rose up on one side and has 3 ribs in its mouth, or 3 bones in its mouth. And I mean, the leopard with 4 wings, and it moves and has 4 different heads. Like, these are very specific things. It's meant to narrow the field. If it just said, I saw a lion, a bear, a leopard, and another beast, you can kind of disregard the prophecy a little bit because you're just saying, oh, you guys are being cute and trying to fit it into some story, right? But you add this layer of specificity, and now you're going to make this thing like impenetrable. You're going to make this absolutely ironclad. And the other part of it is, we went through a bunch in Revelation. This isn't meant to be cryptic. It's not trying to be intentionally vague. It's visions that he saw that were intended to convey a message. There's 2 aspects of this that happen in the Bible. There's the ones where it's like, I saw, as it were, and that's the big part of it. You'll see under here, I saw like unto a bear. Something he saw was either the only thing he could think of that was close to it was a bear, and he's interpreting in his mind, or maybe he saw a bear that indicated that it's not a real bear, right? But he's recording what he saw. And in certain instances where it says, I saw something like unto a star falling from heaven, and the star struck the seas, and 1/3 of the seas were turned to poison, you can sit back and you can say, okay, what would someone in John's day think of seeing a nuclear warhead being launched and flying through the midst of heaven and landing and having nuclear fallout that poisoned the waters? Probably the closest thing you can think of is a falling star, right? And so you can kind of say, maybe he saw an actual vision of a war happening with nuclear warheads and this meteor that destroys 1/3 of the world's water population. Maybe that was actually a nuclear warhead. And you can describe in terms of that. You don't get to do that with a leopard, a bear, a lion, and an eagle. I don't think that's like a description of something yet future, or some technology that he wouldn't recognize. And he's like, I think that looks like a leopard. He probably saw something like a lion, a bear, and he doesn't understand what he's seeing. He just knows it's prophetic, so he's recording it, and it's only with hindsight that these things become clear. And you'll notice that in those instances, someone is always standing by to give you some help, right? There is always someone in the text saying, what you saw was, and in this case, I, Daniel, was grieved in my spirit within my body, and the visions in my head troubled me. I came near to one of those who stood by, so there's a crowd of people standing watching with him in this vision. And I asked him of the truth of all this. So he told me and made known to me the interpretation of these things. Those great beasts, which are 4 kingdoms which arise out of the earth. But the saints of the Most High shall receive the kingdom and possess the kingdom forever and ever, kingdom forever, even forever and ever. Right? So he tells you, we got one clue. We don't know. He doesn't go into specifics. He doesn't say that rib you saw was, but he does tell you these are kingdoms. Okay, we got that nailed down. So now within the framework of kingdoms, you start asking, where does this fit? Okay, you have to work within the framework it's giving you, and we know you don't get to say, well, these are, I can't even imagine. These are geographic locations. These are different planetary features or something like that. You got to lock down at least what it tells you. So if you move through these, this is where it gets just mind-blowing. So the first beast, a lion, and had eagle's wings. Remember, Daniel is in Babylon, and so that description is not all that mesmerizing. The lion with eagle's wings is the symbol of Babylon. In fact, there's 46 of them on the blue gate that we saw last week, which was the symbol of Babylon. A lion with eagle's wings is very clearly symbolic of Babylon, and I think that description is used intentionally so that we can say, nope, these are specific empires. That's very clearly a reference to Babylon. That was the symbol. That was the most predominant symbol. And I beheld the wings thereof were plucked, and it was lifted up from the earth and made to stand upon the feet of a man, and a man's heart was given to it. So you just kind of look at that and you get a sense for how those terms are used elsewhere. Like when something has wings plucked, what concept do you get? It's no longer mobile, right? It can't fly. And you don't have to go too far. You don't have to be too cerebral to get the concept of what's being conveyed by wings being plucked. I think we can all agree from that. I don't think you have to be too cerebral to say if something's lifted up out of the earth, that it's no longer part of the earthly whatever. But that term happens to be used over and over and over of something being lifted up as being taken into the spirit world, right? You're taking it into heaven. You've been lifted up. We get several instances of that. And so you can kind of get a rough estimation here that this nation, this kingdom, was a voracious, fast-moving empire, and that very much describes the conquest of Babylon under Nabopolassar and Nebuchadnezzar. Remember, Nebuchadnezzar was the primary tool for all of Babylon's conquests. He did it in about 15 years. Between Nabopolassar died right after Carchemish, and Nebuchadnezzar returns to be king. He rules for about 40 years, but that conquest was done after the last battle against Egypt. So in about a 15 to 20 year period, Babylon conquered the Assyrians all the way into Egypt and did most of its conquest, and it was incredibly rapid. So it's something with the eagle's wings being fast moving and the lion as a symbol of strength and a strong empire that's fast moving. Kind of that fits the bill for Babylon. And then this idea of its wings were plucked and it was taken out of the earth and made to stand upon feet like a man. That is an odd description of all these. You'll notice none of these other descriptions have that same tone. Babylon, as we talked about 2 weeks ago, becomes the symbol of evil in the Bible. You can tell the entire story of the Bible as the story of two cities, the city of God and the city of Satan. Like Babylon becomes a symbol. It's called the mother of harlots. It's called the place of abominations. It becomes symbolic. I believe it's a physical place that will eventually be rebuilt and restored in order to be destroyed, and we talked about that. But Babylon also has a symbolic significance. And in Revelation 13 and 17, if you weren't part of those studies, I would really encourage you to go back and review those, because we get the idea, we have the destiny of this thing called Babylon that becomes a spiritual, I was going to say a spiritual force, but that's not the right word. This world religion that leads the worship of the Antichrist is called Mystery Babylon in all of Revelation. And it talks about so much about Mystery Babylon and this. Remember, there are two beasts in Revelation. There's the beast that comes out of the sea and the beast of the earth. The beast that comes out of the sea is the Antichrist. And there is a second beast that leads the worship of the first beast. And we have incredible detail given about those. But the woman who rides the beast is called, in Revelation 17, Mystery Babylon. This as a figure, this religious system that causes the world to worship the Antichrist is referred to as the great harlot, the false prophet, the woman who rides the beast, various descriptions, but they always tie back to Babylon, and that's because Babylon becomes the center of rebellion against God. The first world dictator, Nimrod, was out of Babylon. The Tower of Babel becomes the place where man first rebels against God, and we could do 3 weeks worth of classes on all the aspects of the Babylonian religion that are still practiced in our current religious system today. It has perverted Christianity, Catholicism, and every other world religion in ways you can't possibly comprehend. And we did a whole study on that. I think we did a special class just on Mystery Babylon when we were going through Revelation. But we get this idea of Babylon, the nation, is conquered, but it's taken up and it's moved. It then becomes a spiritual force. It's no longer an empire, but it becomes a spiritual force. And that is the entire focus of Revelation 13 and 17, is this idea of Mystery Babylon and God's judgment against this false religious system. And the real disturbing part is how much that description fits the Vatican. So much so that in Revelation 17, it says, he says he marveled at this woman. So that he sees a woman riding the beast, and on her was written the name Mystery Babylon, the great mother of harlots and the abominations of the earth. And John says, I saw the woman drunk with the blood of the saints and the blood of the martyrs of Jesus. If there is one institution that's responsible for the death of more Christians, the Catholic Church is 10x what the Roman government ever put to death in all of the persecution of the church combined. And there is, if you read the book Fox's Book of Martyrs, there's ample evidence for that. But there's a book called A Woman Rides the Beast by Daniel Hunt. Dave Hunt, thank you. Dave Hunt. Where'd you get that? Oh, nice. Yeah. And it is an incredibly, we can't go down that road here or else we'll just get entirely derailed. He lays out with more research than you'd ever want the case for the Vatican being an extension of the Babylonian religion, from the traditions that it adopts to architecture within Vatican City to the entire structure of the papacy, to the concept of confession and atonement, all things that are not found in the Bible anywhere, to even religion. We still celebrate Ashtart as the birth of Christ. That is, Easter is their celebration of the birth of Tammuz, the sun god. And where do you think we get this idea that rabbits are laying eggs? It's a fertility. They're signs of fertility in Babylon. So many of our traditions trace back to Babylon, but once you get into the papacy, you see it is frightening how much.
Every pope, throughout history, just about every one of them.
Yep, absolute wild stories out of the papacy. Not just the Dark Ages when they were selling the papacy for, to the highest bidder. I'm talking like things that are openly discussed within the Vatican. A lot of it deals with astrology. The world's largest satellite network is in Nevada, owned by the Catholic Church. They openly say they are awaiting the visitation of extraterrestrial beings that will this is like not secret stuff. Just Google it. You can. There's a cardinal that's known as the Pope's astronomer, and very much is a direct advisor of the Pope, and really deals in astrology. Is very heavy into astrology. But where it gets wild is he says, I marveled when I saw this being, but the angel said to me, why do you marvel? I will tell you the mystery of the woman and the beast that carries her, which has the 7 heads and the 10 horns. Here is a mind that has wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman sits. And it goes on to list several more. The city of 7 hills is Rome. Just put it in your phone. City of 7 hills. See what comes up. Rome has been called the city of 7 hills since before the Roman emperor's days. There are literally 7 hills, and that's a direct reference to Rome. And then we have, I think it's Jeremiah, we have this story of in the latter days, so in the end times, it's called the woman and the ephah. And 2 women appear. I saw 2 women appear, and they carried an ephah, and they took this thing called wickedness, this thing called Babylon. They put it within an ephah, a giant basket, and they carried it from its place, and they made it a new home in Shinar. So in the end times, they take something, this thing, Mystery Babylon, and they move it from where it lives now, and they put it in the land of Shinar. Shinar is the county, and they establish a home for it. And so you ask, well, where is this? That is talking about whatever this thing is, wickedness. This Mystery Babylon is moved from its location, and we see many, many, many prophecies that we talked about last week regarding the physical destruction of this rebuilt city of Babylon. Getting a little raspy. I got to breathe. That's the key, is breathing. Okay, so Revelation 13 talks about this individual. When it says it stood upon a man's feet, this is where you get these ties to the papacy. The ideas of this second beast that leads the worship of the Antichrist, man, you can just do some insane studies to the Bible lays out incredible detail about him. So I saw another beast coming out of the earth and had two horns so he appeared as a lamb but spoke as the dragon. Does that sound familiar, right? I mean, this is a lamb, a wolf in sheep's clothing. It sounds like a lamb, but it's really a roaring dragon. And he exercises all the authority of the first beast, of the Antichrist, in his presence, and causes the earth and all those who dwell therein to worship the first beast whose deadly wound was healed. And that's a reference back to Isaiah and the one physical description we have of the Antichrist. So Babylon still has significance, but right now it's not a physical world empire. It was taken up into the spiritual, and now it is dominating the world as a spiritual empire. And that very much fits the mold. And then we will see a prophetic scene where that spiritual empire is taken and given a new home in Babylon in the latter days. And that is what I believe is on the horizon and what we saw detailed in chapter 5. Just threw these on here we went through a whole bunch of these in our Revelation 17 study, but just some of the imagery out of the papacy, they literally still wear the mitres. The Pope still wears the mitres head. It's the head of a fish that was Dagon, which is the Assyrian religion, the worship of Dagon. They wore a fish-shaped hat. The priests of Babylon wore a fish-shaped hat. Tell me why the Pope still wears a hat that looks exactly like it. They still do the same cleansing rituals. This idea of the Madonna, the mother and child, comes out of Ishtar and Tammuz, and it's the same exact imagery. Why is the two colors of the Vatican purple and scarlet? Why does the Pope wear purple and the cardinals wear scarlet when the woman that rides the beast is described as being adorned in purple and scarlet? You'd think if this is a Christian institution, we'd go as far away from those two colors. Literally pick any color you want, just don't do those ones because that's the evil ones. The idea of the rosary is Babylonian, of counting the rosary. That's part of the Babylonian religion. Even the crossing themselves, that is a Babylonian tradition. That was the rising of the sun, the setting of the sun, the east and the west. That was their sanctification that they picked up. All of it is very deeply Babylonian, and you can just do hundreds and hundreds of these examples. Once you start getting into architecture, it's scary. So moving on from Babylon, that description is incredible. Not all that powerful because Babylon is already in power, right? Not all that like, wow, how could he have known? It's really that the prophecy of Babylon is meant to forecast the future aspect of it. The rest of these are all now yet future, right? Daniel is sitting in Babylon. The Persian Empire has not yet conquered when he says. Belshazzar is still in his first year. Cyrus was a unique character because his mother is Median and his father is Persian. And so the reason he was able to unite and conquer the Medo-Persian Empire is because he was a little royalty of both. And so he caused them to unite. They were still a fractured state, and Cyrus isn't even in power at the time Daniel's writing it, during the first year of the reign of Belshazzar. So everything we're about to read is yet future, and it's still at a point when you couldn't contemplate someone conquering Babylon. Even the king of Babylon, if you remember chapter 5, when the armies of the Persian Empire were standing at his gates, he didn't even man the walls. He threw parties. They were so confident that no one could possibly ever overthrow Babylon because they had 30 feet high walls that you could race 6 chariots abreast on, double walled, and the city had the Euphrates River flowing right through it. They were confident that they were impenetrable. And so this is at a time when the whole world believed Babylon could not be conquered, and yet here we start going. I saw a bear, and it raised itself up on one side, and it had 3 ribs in the mouth of it, between the teeth of it, and they said thus unto it, Arise, devour much flesh. So the concept you get from this is a slower moving empire that became dominant. One side became dominant, right? It rose up on one side, and it devours 3 other bodies. It's got bones of something else in its mouth, so it's devouring something else, 3 of something. And then it says it will conquer a large area, right? It was given, arise, devour much flesh. That's the feel of what you're reading. If you look back on history, the Medo-Persian Empire started as a union between the Medians and the Persians, and Cyrus quickly overthrew the Medians. It rose up on one side. Most people don't even realize the Medo-Persian Empire had anything to do with the Medes. Everyone knows the Persian Empire. That became the dominant force in spite of the fact that it was about a tenth of the size of the Median Empire. He actually betrays his father-in-law and defeats the Medes that way, and that's Cyrus's first major conquest. But this idea that it rose up on one side, you've got an alliance with two, but one rises up. Other people will say, well, that's a and I've got some info here on Cyrus's rise and his revolt against his father to take control of the Medo-Persian Empire. But a lot of people will say, well, rising up on one side is because it only conquered one direction. But that's not true. It only conquered one direction under Cyrus, but the subsequent emperors, Artaxerxes and Xerxes Longimanus, they conquered very far to the east, so I don't buy that one. I think it's really a reference to one side rose up. One side rose up over the other. But the crazy part is it has 3 bones in its mouth. If you look up and just read the story of the conquests of the Medo-Persian Empire, it conquered the known world with 3 major conquests. It defeated Babylon, it defeated Egypt, which was the second world power, and it defeated Lydia. Lydia was like the north, which is the area that would encompass Greece and Macedonia. So there were 3 major world conquests, and that's what made up the conquest of the Persian Empire. It had some subsequent small victories, but those were the 3 major victories. You want to talk about 3 bones in its mouth? There were 3 conquests that made up its entire power structure. That's pretty accurate. If there were 4, if you could say, well, there were 4 major campaigns, then this becomes less impressive, but the history of the Medo-Persian Empire bears exactly that. Now you get into the Grecian Empire, and I have a slide here coming up to where you can appreciate, kind of the scope of what we're talking about. But now we're so far remote in possibility to say that someone could have foreseen the Grecian Empire becoming a world power or what happened in Greece is absurd. Greece was nothing. And not only was Greece nothing, the man who did most of the conquests wasn't even Greek. He's Macedonian. Alexander the Great was a Macedonian, and his father, Philip of Macedon, was the one that conquered Greece first. But at the time he's writing this, Greece is 11 different states, and Macedonia isn't even part of Greece. It's just a whole bunch of very weak, fragmented city-states. And so he writes this, and he describes this one as a leopard, which had 4 wings, and the beast also had 4 heads. So not getting into biblical, just the impression you get from that, leopard is a fast-moving animal, right? And on top of that, this thing has 4 wings. It is trying to convey this idea of extreme speed. If you had a winged leopard, and it's a swift empire, cunning, extremely efficient is the way I would describe the Grecian Empire. But the really interesting part is it has 4 separate heads. And that's where you start getting into, just like with the 3 ribs, you start getting into why? Like, what does that mean? It better be right or it's absolutely absurd. The Grecian Empire conquered the entire, so from the point when Philip of Macedon died, he was betrayed and killed after he finished conquering the lower areas of Greece. So he sort of roughly united Greece. And from the point when he died and Alexander the Great, his son, took over, it was 8 years before they conquered the known world, overthrew the Persian Empire, and took over everything that was the civilized known world around the Mediterranean in 8 years without motorized vehicles, on foot, right? Like the speed of Alexander's conquest, he took over when he was 20. The legend is that he died when he was 29, or when he died when he was 32. But there's a legend that at age 29, he fell on his bed in the city of Babylon, and he made it his capital. He fell in his bed weeping because there were no more known worlds left to conquer. And like that's the rapidity of the rise of Alexander the Great. So if you want to talk about a leopard and a fast-moving beast that came and took over, it was very literally 8 years from him taking leadership, and his campaign is incredible. And I have to resist a little bit here. I have a note here. That's to myself. Daniel 8 and 11 describes the rise and conquest of the Grecian Empire with such incredible detail, like to the individual, to each of the individuals that's doing things and which ones are making war against who, with such incredible detail that I just kind of have to punt on that. But put some detail about the rise of Alexander in this one, just for anyone that's interested. The crazy part is, and this beast had 4 heads. Alexander the Great, as we said, only ruled for about 8 years. He was 20 when he took over. About 12 years. He was 20 when he took over. He was 32 when he dies, very young. And when he dies, he very famously, when they asked him, who should the kingdom go to? He had no children. He said, give it to the strong. And he had very intentionally wanted civil war. He was a guy that he was an absolute dictator that was cruel beyond belief. His legend is very colorful, but he was awful. He was probably one of the world's worst dictators, and he conquered one of the best. Cyrus was known for being tolerant. That's why the Bible, Isaiah calls him, you are a king of kings. He left the governments that he conquered in place. He encouraged and gave incentives for rise of culture, and he was very tolerant of different things. He was very well known and very well loved. Alexander the Great was not. He was an absolute military dictator that conquered the world with violence that you wouldn't believe. And so then when he dies, he says, instead of having some plan for succession, he intentionally institutes civil war in the known world and says, give it to the strong. So what happens? His 2 primary tutors are given the area around Greece. So Lysimachus and Cassander split up the area around Greece, but all the areas that he conquered go to Ptolemy and Seleucus. And so you hear of the Seleucian Empire, the Seleucian Empire, or the Ptolemaic Empire. Those become 2 separate empires out of Greece, and it's divided into 4. And for all the period that we think of as the Grecian Empire, Alexander the Great comes to mind. He only lived 12 years. For the other 240 is the story of these 4 individuals who set themselves up as kings in those areas, warring against each other. And so Daniel is here telling in advance that this beast will conquer swiftly, but it will have 4 heads, and that is exactly how history plays out. And go look what's right in the middle of all of these 4. A little place called Israel. It ends up being a buffer state where every one of their wars against each other take place in Israel, so much so that it culminates in Antiochus Epiphanes, he calls himself Epiphanes, it means the illustrious one, but the Jews called him Epimanes, which means the madman. He is the one that did the abomination that caused desolation. When he sacrificed a pig on the altar and declared himself to be God in order to invoke the Jews to rebel because he wanted to slaughter all of them. But instead, the Maccabees joined together a rebel force and overthrew the Grecian Empire. And that's what we celebrate at Hanukkah. That's the Festival of Lights and the Maccabean revolts. It becomes this central point of all history because Israel happens to be at the crossing roads of all 4 of these heads, these 4 world empires. But the precision to say this thing that isn't even a city, Greece wasn't even a thing, it's a bunch of city-states when he writes this, and the guy that's going to do the conquest isn't even a Greek at that point. He's Macedonian. He hasn't even conquered the area that's going to do this. So there are so many things that had to go into place. And then the conquering hero is going to die within 2 years of finishing his conquest, and it's going to be divided among his 4 primary generals. That is specificity that you just have to either say, yeah, it was written after the fact. I mean, give me something else that you could say about that, because it specifically says in the text, we're talking about kingdoms that will arise upon the earth. So you can't get away from that one. And then there's the last one. And this one is where Daniel really focuses. And then I saw a great and terrible beast, and strong exceedingly, and it had great iron teeth. It devoured and broke into pieces and stamped the residue with its feet, and it was diverse from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. There is no interpretation of what this animal is, because you'll note that he doesn't even have anything to compare it to. What he sees is like nothing he knows. It doesn't say it's like unto a bear. It doesn't say, it just says, what I saw was a great and terrible beast. There's nothing that he can even use as a reference point in this vision to equate it to, right? So it's something we've never seen before, is the idea there. You can say, well, the Babylonian Empire is like unto a lion in the way that it conquers, and the Persian Empire is like unto a bear. It could field a 5 million man standing army, which is huge today, not to mention back then. It was ponderous and gigantic, and conquered the most land of any of them by a lot. And then the Grecian Empire was fast and swift-moving, but was divided. It had 4 different heads, so it had 4 different minds. But in this one, he sees it, and he can't even describe. It's unlike it. And you ask the question, okay, well, why is the Roman Empire different from all the ones before? Didn't it just conquer just like everyone else? And any historian, the reason people love Rome and the reason there's still magazines written about the Roman Empire and why every dude has some weird psychological obsession with the Roman Empire and knowing something about it is they valued only strength, nothing else. They took pride in what they could destroy. They did not leave things in place. They did not leave governments in place. If you didn't become Roman, 100%, if your entire population wouldn't on the spot fall and worship Caesar, you were obliterated. Like they would, the tactics of the Roman Empire did not care what they left behind. They wiped out entire civilizations, genocides at numbers you can't fathom today, because they stomped into the ground any form of resistance whatsoever. You became Roman or you were put down. And that is very different from each of the subsequent who conquered and then tried to take advantage of the resources, didn't destroy the cities, but became wealthier because of it. They didn't care about wealth. They didn't care about influence. They valued what they could destroy. And that's you get a sense of that in movies that cover that period, but that is that's the Iron Eagle. That's the entire basis of the Roman Empire. It was destruction. And that's why there's nothing left after it happens. You notice that after each one of these prior world empires, cities and cultures that were around are still around to be conquered. It doesn't, how many times was the city of Babylon taken? It was made the world capital by Cyrus, then by Alexander, and then it was decimated by the Romans. The city wasn't destroyed, but the people were. And so each one of them, there's something left behind, not the Roman Empire. The reason it says it's still, all we see as remnants of it today, is because it just stamped out all of world culture. It's the reason all of our history books are completely, what I'm going to use the word whitewashed, but you all know what I mean by that. Like, we look at all of history in the Western world is seen through the eyes of Rome because it destroyed all other opposition. There are no history books of the Medes and the Persians. There are no, Cyrus is painted in our history books as a tyrant and as a world dictator that was righteously overthrown by the Greeks, when in reality, now that we have the value or the benefit of historical records that have been brought to light and archaeological finds, that's not the case at all. We see all of human history through the lens of Rome because they wiped out everything and made everything Roman. And so you have effectively a world reset that you can never fully appreciate until you've studied history with Rome. They just, whether it's the Phoenicians, all the way into Africa, the Egyptians, there is just a hard reset on civilization that came out of Rome. And really, as we said before, then you have this idea that 10 horns, so 10 powers come out of it. So it's got one head, but eventually 10 powers come out of it. And so you can ask the question, do those 10 powers, those 10 horns, is that yet future? Is there 10 horns that are going to reunite out of the Roman Empire in the end times? Because we know this is going to start having some end times implications. Or did that already happen? As the Roman Empire devolved, as it broke apart, was it 10 empires that came out of it? I'm not sure that it matters. I think it's really interesting that there are most classical histories would classify the various geographic regions and political climates that came out of the fallen Roman Empire in tens. So much so that Isaac Newton, most people don't realize, Isaac Newton wrote an entire Bible commentary. He was an incredible Bible scholar. And in his Bible commentary, he cites to Eusebius, to Jerome, to Marcus de Antonio, which are three different cultures, three different historians from three different cultures that hold that the Roman Empire devolved into 10 major fragments. And so there might be something there, but the concept behind it is out of the Roman Empire, the Roman Empire that just kind of dissipated, there will be 10 powers that come out of it. And whether that's yet future or not, we see this concept picked up in Revelation. When it talks about the beast takes 10 head, the beast that is, let's just call him the Antichrist. That's probably the least descriptive term from him and only used once in the Bible. But he rises to power and becomes a beast that has 10 heads and 7 horns, right? So you can see the correlation. And in case you didn't pick that up from other passages, Revelation 13 says, "Then I stood on the sand of the sea, and I saw a beast rising out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and on his horns 10 crowns, and on his heads a blasphemous name. Now the beast which I saw was like a leopard, his feet were like that of a bear, and his mouth was like that of a lion." So the exact same empires we just saw, only in reverse order, because now we're looking backwards. Daniel's looking forward and sees them as a lion, a bear, a leopard, and a beast. Now John's looking backwards, and he sees from his end times vision and sees them in reverse chronological order. So this great beast that the Antichrist comes to power on is like these other world empires in various aspects of their dominion. But the dragon gave him his power and his throne and great authority, and I saw one of his heads that had been mortally wounded, and his deadly wound was healed, and all the world marveled and followed the beast. So they worshiped the dragon who gave the authority to the beast. So part of what the Antichrist does is he comes to power on this beast that is very similar. It's described in the same exact way as we see the Roman Empire described, and so most people would say, I don't know if there are any biblical scholars that disagree, that I haven't found them, that whatever the Antichrist, whatever his world empire, it somehow is a reunited Roman Empire, or it has attributes of the Roman Empire. It has the 10 areas. He owns those places, or it has 10 separate states. That's why when the European Union hit 10 nations, everyone got very excited. That, oh boy, here we go. That's the 10 nation. He's going to come to the Antichrist. And I think that's even picked up in the Left Behind series, is that the European Union is an amalgamation of 10 nations, 7 of which are powerful, and then the Antichrist comes to power in that. It doesn't quite fit the bill because it misses the part where it says the Antichrist is the 11th horn. He's not one of the 10, he's the 11th, and we'll talk about that. But really, what Daniel is predicting here is a great world empire that would absolutely crush and subdue nations and would never be defeated. And then he's going to go on in the second half of this chapter to talk about how that will follow all the way in to the end times. That he's going to tie the end times prophecy together with this empire, and that is exactly what we've seen throughout history. Like I said, if something else came along and conquered and became a world empire after Rome, all of this becomes nonsense. But the fact that Rome so badly decimated and stomped out civilization across most of the known world that it only recovered in Roman style, it absolutely fits the bill of what he's saying here. I mean, it is almost impossible to think at that time. Let me just skip through I just included this for your notes, just my little summary of each of the beasts. But at the time Daniel's writing this, Babylon is the primary world power. Persia conquers so much of the known world within probably 30 years of Daniel writing this that it is astronomical. Like it said, by the time Artaxerxes is around, he could field a 5 million man army. 5 million man army in ancient times. That is astronomical today. That's huge. And Daniel is predicting that Greece would overthrow it. I'm showing about a third of the Persian Empire in green here. Like really, it extends so far to the east. He says an empire will come up and will overthrow that empire. And so who could have ever foreseen that Greece, that's Macedonia, they were separate at the time he's writing this. And then on top of that, who could have possibly foreseen that, it was a closer view of what Greeks and Macedonia would have looked like, who could have possibly seen that what is now Italy would then come along and decimate the world culture, like stomp it into dust in the way it describes it as grinding it under his heel till there's nothing left, and basically do a hard reset on all of human civilization. Rome wasn't even a thing. I don't even know if it was populated at that time. That far north, I don't even know that was really a civilized area. There were certainly, cities and people, but there was no known government around there. And he predicts the rise of three subsequent empires that at the time would have seemed impossible to anyone reading this. And it very clearly states they are kingdoms. So you layer that on top of the vision of the statue that Nebuchadnezzar gets, and we see it's already laid out that there will only ever be 4 major world empires, and we kind of get a structure of them in order, and it sort of, you can really easily, it details the type of government they will be, that one is stronger, one has a figurehead, one breaks apart with the feet of iron, and then you put that together with chapter 7 of the description of these, and Daniel has laid out the history of world empires at minimum 300 years in advance of them happening, with such specificity that he's predicting the division between Seleucus, Ptolemy, Lysander, and Lysimachus, right? I mean, the fact that the Grecian Empire would have 4 heads and they would war against each other with different minds. Like, you can't possibly appreciate the specificity of that until you really cement your mind in the fact that he's writing it before these places are even concepts. Looking back, we're still like, wow, that's incredible. Like, he detailed that the Persian Empire would rise by conquering 3 different nations that had three bones in its mouth. Sure enough did. And each one of these becomes more and more specific. And so I'm going to cut it short because we have, otherwise I'm going to go way over. And I'll finish chapter 7 in the next part. And in chapter 7, Daniel, because he's such a good man and a friend of mine, looks at this 4th beast and says, I was troubled by the sight of this 4th beast. And so I asked, what is the story of this 4th beast? And he asked, what is the horns that are on its head? And what is this little horn that grows out of it? And the angel actually, or the messenger, whoever it is, explains in a little more detail. But the rest of this starts to talk about the horns that come out of this 4th beast. And this is the point when we very clearly shift to things yet future. And he gives a very detailed account of the Antichrist's rise, and that it would come out, that the 10 horns would come out of this last beast, but an 11th horn will rise, and it will pluck up 3 of those horns, and by its might it will subdue the others. And it ends up being an absolute direct parallel to what we saw in Revelation 13 and 17, which even gives the same detail, that it becomes a beast with 7 heads but 10 horns, and then it talks about a little horn rising out of it. And so we'll push that to next week just for time's sake. But I think this first part, and I'll put a hard stop on it, if you were to say, as I said at the beginning, how could you show that the Bible is inspired? You can get into Daniel 9 that gives the exact date, 500 years in advance, on which the Messiah would present himself as the King of Israel. He predicts it not to the month, not to the year. He gives it to the exact day, and Christ holds him accountable. But it requires some knowledge of the Bible and some of the terminology and such. You could point to chapter 7 and 11, or 8 and 11, that detail the Grecian Empire, the ram and the he-goat. It literally describes the victory of the Grecian Empire over the Persians, and how one horn rose out, and this one had 2 horns, but one horn became mightier than the second, and details those. But there's a lot of again, prophetic background you need to get, you could take this chunk, and I don't care who you're talking to, if you just took the first, whatever this is, 12 verses, 15 verses of Daniel 7, and you flat out just set it in front of someone and say, tell me, if you're a student of history, tell me this isn't the entire history of the Mediterranean from the rise of Babylon through the current state with a decimated Roman Empire. Like, please, like, tell me, poke holes in this, or admit that this was inspired. You know, that to me is all the proof you need that this book is written outside of our time domain, because I am just blown away by the specificity. And the more you get into history, the more you see it very much detailed, the things that no one could have possibly imagined, with countries that were less than irrelevant. And no, it's just unfathomable to be living in Babylon with the splendor and the power of that nation, and even think about it being conquered, not to mention throw out the next two that would subsequently conquer after that. So I love this passage for that, and I like, maybe it doesn't do it justice without spending hours on the history of each of those, but you get the flavor of it, and the more time you spend just going through that first half of it, the more you're just blown away by the text. Let me see. I think there was one more slide I wanted to. Nope. Okay. So we'll hit the last part of it. We'll let the last part of it before the next one, and it's really it's exactly what we covered in Revelation 13 and 17. So if you've been part of that study, if not, then you get far more detail in that. But they're parallel accounts. The little horns, the horns that rise to power in the last half of Daniel 7 are unquestionably parallel to the story told in 13 and 17. So we'll go through that next week. And then I'm not sure how I'm going to do it, but maybe we'll restructure a little bit. Next week was supposed to be chapter 9, which is the 70 weeks of Daniel, which is without a doubt the most incredible prophecy in the entire Bible. Daniel he knows scripture, he knows Isaiah or Jeremiah, the writings of Jeremiah was a contemporary of his, and he knows that God determined 70 years upon the nation of Israel, 70 years of captivity. It's almost up. We're in like the 68th year, and so Daniel says, I went to prayer, and I confessed my sins, and I prayed, and it gives the prayer of Daniel. And in the middle of that prayer, he's interrupted, and Gabriel comes to him with a message, and he tells Daniel the day that the Messiah would enter Jerusalem and present himself as the King of Israel. And go figure and it gives it in such specificity that it is just incredible. And you lay out that timeline, and it is the precise day on which Jesus entered the city on a donkey and was worshipped as the King of Israel, was presented, and they sang the Hosanna psalm, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord, Hosanna, Hosanna, save now. He was embraced by a select few, and then after that happens, when it wasn't everybody, he goes up onto a mountain, and he says, oh, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, you that stones the prophets and kills those who are sent, how often would I have gathered together? But you didn't realize that this thy hour, that there was an hour that was predicted, and he expected them to know it from Daniel. And he said, because you didn't recognize that in this thy hour, your cities will be laid waste. Not one stone will be left standing. And that is what caused what we refer to as the diaspora. The dispersion of the Jews throughout the whole world is because in 70 AD, Titus' Spurgeon and the 10th, 12th, and 15th Legion come into Rome or into Jerusalem and literally destroy the entire city. Emperor, I'm drawing a blank. The statement was, Jerusalem can never be governed as long as one Jew lives in Israel. And so the edict was no Jew was allowed to live in Israel. And over 1 million Jews were killed in about a 15-day period. And so much so when Jesus said, not one stone will be left on top of another, there was an accidental fire started, and he's talking about the temple, not one stone will be left upon another. there was an accidental fire started. They didn't intend to burn the city, but a fire started in the north central area during the conquest, and the temple area and the Temple Mount caught fire. If you've read the description of the temple, the entire top was inlaid in gold. And so when a fire broke out, the gold melted down through the mortar and the bricks. And so the Romans literally took every single stone, tossed it over the western face so that they could pick the gold out of the mortar. And very literally, not one stone was left upon another. Again, the precision of that prophecy. You think the Romans were trying to fulfill the words of some heretic they crucified in 25 years ago? They fulfilled it to the letter inadvertently. And Christ said that was a judgment because they didn't know Daniel. They weren't ready for that day, that specific day. And so we're going to go through that prophecy. And that one alone, we should spend 6 or 7 weeks on, but we'll try to do it in 1 or 2. Probably 2, since we're going to have a little bit of chapter 7 now. But I'm going to save chapter 8 and do that one at 11 together. So that is